Stay. So I was at a store the other day, and I was going through the self-checkout and paying cash, putting my money in, and it kept spitting it out. Putting my $10 bill in, the $10 bill came back out. And I thought, it's facing the wrong direction. So I turned it around and I put it in and spit it back out. And I tried it again and it spit it back out. And then I realized there was a piece of tape around the middle of the $10 bill. And so I put it back in my wallet and pulled out another $10 bill, which it took just fine. It was a blemished $10 bill. I was at the temple in Jerusalem, presenting a blemished offering. And that's what this whole thing about the money changers was about. And it was that the law said that you had to present an unblemished, depending on what you could afford, sheep or dove, which is just a pigeon with good PR. And at first, that was okay. And then somebody figured out how to make some money off of it. They said, you know, yeah, it's a pretty good pigeon, but it's not really unblemished. We can sell you a better pigeon, and it will make God happier. Now, of course, because it's a better pigeon, it's going to be a little bit above market. But God's going to spit the old pigeon back at you just like a $10 bill with a piece of tape on it. And not be pleased with your offering unless you buy mine. And so what really happened was this system developed not unlike the payday loan store, wherein those who could least afford it were charged a premium rate for something that in all reality wasn't any better than what they could have brought. You know, it's funny how the expert at the pigeon booth could tell that yours isn't quite right, even though you could look at it, you know, and not detect it. Kind of like going to the jeweler. Oh. And the jeweler puts that little thing in their eye and goes, oh, there's a flaw in that, right? And so it wasn't really, or maybe even primarily about the fact that there were transactions going on, although that wasn't all right either. But it was that the oppressed were being taken advantage of. That became the real problem. And if you think about it, within that is this thing we have as human beings about perfection. And what is perfection? And is perfection, we don't even stop to ask if perfection is necessary. We assume perfection is necessary. And the minute we think we found it, now we do all kinds of stupid stuff. And I'm not referring to the people buying the pigeons. I just learned this week, well, I knew about this guy, but his name's Sogyal Rinpoche. He wrote a book called The Tibetan Book of Living and Dying, which was, he didn't, excuse me, he didn't really write it. I mean, he took the Tibetan Book of the Dead and made it more contemporary, sold it. It was a big seller. 10 years later or so, he comes out with the revised edition, which I don't really know how revised it was. And I happened to be looking up somebody else online, and I came across a couple of stories about this guy that seem pretty true. One is which he has absolutely no formal training in Buddhism. And he sexually abused his students. And somebody probably, they think, they have a pretty good idea, since he lacks formal training, that somebody else wrote the book for him. And he published it under his name. And he's established one of the biggest Buddhist empires, for lack of a better word, in North America and Europe. Why? Well, at least in part because people decided that he was fully awake, that he was enlightened. And once you decide that, well, whatever he tells you must be all right. And at least two of the people he abused came forward in a video. One of them was the daughter of this guy who was an airline pilot and so served as his personal charter pilot. Now, if there's one person I don't want to make mad, it's the guy who's flying my airplane. but that's just me. But you know, and maybe it just shows the root of the whole problem. That when ego runs amok, there's no limit to which you will go. But this pilot's daughter said, when he told me to take my clothes off, I thought, well, he's enlightened, so there must be a reason and this must be good for me. And again, when we decide that somebody is perfect or knows everything or has some special level of achievement, we become all too willing to not just drop boundaries, but drop even reasonable measures of self-protection because we assume that the other person has our best interests at heart. Just like the people that went to the temple to buy their pigeons assumed that because those people were selling in the temple grounds, they must have their best interest at heart. And what I want to ask is, and I think we all need to be asking this, and more often than once, in much more benign sort of ways, when do things that once served us get to the point where they no longer serve us? And how do we let them go? Now, if you're like me, well, it's not so bad since the last time we moved. But prior to that, you could have gone to my closet, and which also had expanded. We had a walk-in attic, you know, it was a bungalow, so you could walk in, floors, it wasn't rafters or anything. And I had strung poles and from the rafters that to make like long clothes bars, so we could hang all the clothes on there, right? And a lot of us, anyway, in our closet have clothes that will never fit us again. And in my case, I not only had clothes that would never fit me again, but clothes that didn't fit me at the time, but there was a good chance those are more likely to fit me one day. You know, they didn't fit me because they were too big. Those I was likely to grow into. But the ones that were too small, and sometimes like shirts that were 4 sizes too small. And if we can't get rid of the clothes that no longer serve us, you can imagine what a struggle we're going to have getting rid of beliefs that no longer serve us. And I think some of it is because we tend instead to run away. I remember the first time I went to a Buddhist talk by somebody who knew what they were doing, and I went out to the Pyle Center in Madison to hear Sharon Salzberg talk. And I got there early because I had met with a couple in Madison earlier in the day about their wedding, so I was like 2 hours ahead of time. But I was so glad to find the place that I went in, I had dinner, I went there early, and I watched people come in, and it wasn't any different than watching people come into a Christian church. The behaviors were a little different, but the quirks were all the same. You know, instead of somebody sitting like this, there was the person who found a folding chair and immediately sat full lotus, an hour before the program was going to start, because people had to see her sitting full lotus. And then there were the people over a couple aisles up who were standing there gossiping about, you know, Betty and whether she would really show up tonight or not, which isn't any different than anything you see in any church. And for every, you know, there were people who had sort of, whether they were told or not, they had assigned themselves a role of usher, you know, and then there were so people were falling into those old habits, and they imagined they had run away from a particular context, but really they just carried it with them and went down the street. And sometimes, maybe even most of the time, that's pretty harmless. But sometimes we carry the stuff that really burdened us. It's funny to walk into a Unitarian Universalist church and identify as a Christian, because it's kind of not so cool in most of them. Some of them, it'll be okay. But some of them, it's like saying, you know, I've just sacrificed all my family members and I've left them in the garage so I could come here for services. And when I get done, I'm going to take them to a dumpster.
Or put them in your trunk.
Or put them in my trunk, where there's plenty of room. The other thing that's really interesting is to listen to a Buddhist community talk about faith. And that's why I thought this first reading was particularly interesting. Faith and belief, and how the automatic assumption is that faith and belief are blind. And what you're being asked to do is buy a bill of goods. And it seems like the relationship that these people have developed with faith is so fractured that even though they've left the context and ran down the street, they can't really surrender to what it is they're saying that they believe in now, because even belief is kind of problematic. And it's so bad that a couple of years ago, when Sharon Salzberg wrote a book called Faith for a Buddhist audience, it was roundly criticized. How dare you use that word, right? So, when we inventory what serves us and what doesn't, and we want to make changes, it seems to me the first thing we need to do is let go of this idea, not only that perfection is a goal, but that it's even achievable. So if we could just say, we're never going to have a perfect view of anything, then maybe the fact that we once saw things this way, and we now see it this way, and we're willing to admit it out loud, isn't the same as admitting, you know, that we're this horrible, horrible person that likes to set fire to orphanages on Sunday nights. You know? Maybe if we can learn to hold those things loosely, we can let them go. It's a question of attachment. And maybe if a word comes for us to mean something that is no longer accurate. In other words, if the only way we understand faith is blind, unthinking faith, maybe we can learn to allow ourselves to redefine that. That faith is how Brad Warner describes, or how Brad Warner quotes Karen Armstrong as defining faith prior to medieval times. Trust, loyalty, engagement, commitment. Maybe, regardless of what label we would put on our own spiritual journey, we could take that concept from the Kalama Sutra, which says, test it out. And if it doesn't work, it's okay to let it go. Remember, contrary to what some people believe, our beliefs did not descend from heaven in a book and smack us in the head on the way down. Tablets, stone tablets. Unless you're a Mormon, in that case it's a book.
Plates, as John Smith.
Oh, the golden plates, that's right. I always forget. Can't have mundane paper involved. But it was always experience, and then somebody tries to describe it. And describing it requires language, so the description is never spot on anyway.
It's like trying to describe a dream.
Say that again.
Like trying to describe a dream.
Oh,
It
yes.
makes sense to you, but you can't
Exactly.
put words to it.
Exactly. And what if we take that principle from meditation and apply it to belief? And the principle for meditation is that when your thoughts wander and you bring them back, it's in the coming back that meditation occurs. What if then, regarding the things we believe, if when they start to fall away and we come back to a revised understanding, that's where belief occurs. And if we accept it, as we do in meditation, we say your mind will wander, unless you're brain dead. And I've known some people that have been, and they've been able to live a normal life. So your mind's going to wander. But enough about my family. I'm here all week. So, your mind's going to wander, and the bringing it back is meditation. Your beliefs will change. And in the coming back and deciding what it is today, it is being faithful to the journey. And most of all, and people would certainly disagree with me, let's give up the notion that any spiritual leader, teacher, pastor, guru, so let's forget about guru, is perfect.
Oh, you just want us to cut you a break.
Well, yeah, that would be nice. That would be nice.
Well, my illusions are shattered, I don't know.
That's right, yeah, romantics. But haven't we learned that that's where every problem occurs? And apparently we haven't. Or we've learned it, but then we find ourselves right back in there learning it again. And no. I don't know the specifics. If we start to understand that, and I don't like Lutheran, I don't often quote Lutheran ideas, but the Lutheran understanding of pastor is that just like your accountant is hopefully, unless you're an accountant, better equipped to do your taxes than the average Joe. Your accountant has knowledge in an area of expertise, an area of practice, but still at the end of the day is a person just like you. And you yourself have an area of expertise and an area of practice that you know better than your accountant does. And so it's okay to say, perhaps somebody has something to teach me. Perhaps I can learn something from this person. Perhaps I can just hang around this person and watch and be careful. And that's really what spiritual leadership is about. Spiritual leadership is more about spiritual friendship, spiritual companioning, spiritual sharing, and isn't about this surrendering of my power. Do whatever you want to me, because I know it'll be good for me. How much was that pigeon?
It's not serving any Kool-Aid, huh?
No Kool-Aid. They're, well, not till the asteroid gets close. And finally, this thing about temple. And it really reinforces what I'm saying. In Jewish thought, in biblical times, when the temple was still there, and not covered by other things, God lived inside the temple physically. In a room inside the temple called the Holy of Holies. And the only person that could go in there was the high priest once a year to make offerings. And as we move towards Easter, one of the things that happens with the story of the resurrection, now you can ask, how did anybody know this? Because nobody could go in there and look. Which is how you know that a myth is a story that's true and might have happened. But the temple veil is torn in two. And the temple veil separated the Holy of Holies from the rest of the world. What it's saying symbolically is that, much like Elvis has left the building, God has left the temple and now dwells everywhere. So if that's true, and I believe it is true, then why would you give your power away to somebody else? Because if they're trying to tell you that they have God, divinity, the universe, a secret, opposed to the secret, which when you started, something you need to know, a particular trick, a path to this different state of consciousness. No, they don't. Or if they have it, they don't have it exclusively. And one of the ways to tell if they have anything to offer is if they're holding it ransom. If they're saying, I could give this to you, but I couldn't help but notice you're missing a wing feather. You're not the perfect pigeon. Remember back in detective television shows in the 70s? The mark of a con artist was always a pigeon. those crime shows, they don't say, look, here comes the pigeon.
Yeah.
And it was the person they were gonna con.
Kojak.
Kojak and all those. Who loves you, baby?
Yeah.
What we have, and what we need, is around us and within us. Perhaps we just can't see it. And the role of the spiritual leader or teacher or companion or whatever you want to call the person is maybe to help us clean our glasses or our windshield. Find a little
You
button.
were here for that.
Yeah, we'll retell that story later because I enjoyed it so much.
And also to open our hands so we let go.
Yes, not at the price, and none of it should happen at the condition of getting into our wallets, our pants, or anything else.